Order, order. We start with questions. Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, Jack Rankin.
Question number one, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Can I start by wishing you and every member of the House a happy new year, Mr. Speaker? The government is committed to increasing R&D to a record allocation of £20.4 billion in 24-25. Lord Vallance continues to meet with mathematical science representatives to determine how best to support the sector. The government is supporting the mathematical science sector in ways that best delivers for the taxpayer without the time and expense required to set up a new organisation.
Jack Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last financial year, the Minister's Department underspent by nearly £600 million. The proposed National Maths Academy was due to cost just £6 million, 1% of that total. People are disappointed by this cancellation. Can the Minister therefore explain whether he cancelled the Academy because he doesn't value the role of our national academies or because he doesn't think mathematical sciences are important?
I've just explained all of the ways we are helping and assisting and supporting and driving mathematical science. He has just listed all of the ways that he has failed that sector by underspending in many parts of government and failing to commit the spending to the project that he's now calling this government to support.
Steve Race.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that the recent announcement of new funding for research and development in the budget actually gives the sector really good clarity across the coming years about the investment and the way forward that this government wishes to take? Thank you.
I'm grateful for his question. He is quite right to highlight that finally science and technology in this country has a government that is on its side and putting its money where its mouth is.
Billington. Order. Please, I've got the members on their feet.
Number two, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
We are absolutely determined to make sure that copyright and intellectual property is protected as it always has been in this country. Our consultation is designed to do two specific things: ensure that there is legal certainty for AI developers and creative industries alike, and to make sure that there is more licensing of copyright material by AI developers.
Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. However, visual artists earn far below the minimum wage and rely on copyright royalties to finance their work and continue to contribute to our world-leading creative industries in Thanet and across the country. What reassurances can the Minister give that the plans for a copyright exception for AI learning will not further contribute to that financial instability and weaken the lifeblood of our creative economy?
Minister.
She's absolutely right. She could big up her own constituency a little bit more because, I mean, Margate is probably one of the greatest centres of artists in this country. It's where Turner was trained, went to school. It's where you have Turner Contemporary, Tracy Emin doing so much work, and many, many other artists as well. It's a brilliant hub. Now, we want to make sure, as we did when we were in the last Labour government, when we introduced the artist resale right, that artists can earn a living out of their art. That's what we're determined to do, and we will make sure, just as last year New Zealand and Australia entered into the same agreement for artists' resale right, we want to make sure that there's a future revenue stream for every single artist in this country.
Sir John Whittingdale.
Does the Minister agree that transparency is absolutely crucial if creators are to understand where their works are being used by AI developers? Can he therefore assure me that the government will legislate on transparency, whatever the outcome in terms of the consultation on copyright reform?
He makes a really good point about transparency, and that's why that's one of the key elements of our consultation. We have, however, presented a package because we really want to make sure that we have a win-win here. So AI developers have the legal certainty that they need to be able to develop their products in the UK as UK producers, and secondly, so that creative industries can make sure that they know when their works have been used, and if they want to say no, they can say no, and if they want to say yes, they get properly remunerated for it.
Josh Newbury.
Number three, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My department is working incredibly closely with the Department of Health, and myself and the Health Secretary are joined at the hip on these issues. This includes unprecedented investment in R&D to understand how better to diagnose disease, the co-investment in initiatives such as the Health Innovation Networks, which have enabled 1.2 million patients to access proven innovations, and, as the digital centre of government that we've now created, partnering closely with the NHS to improve the deployment and innovation of technology.
Josh Newbury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his response. My constituency of Cannock Chase has wide health inequalities, particularly high levels of respiratory illness and bladder and brain cancer. In some parts of the country, NHS trusts are rapidly speeding up diagnostic waiting times by using highly accurate AI models with the results checked by human clinicians. Can he confirm that the government is supporting safe tech innovations like this to help fulfil our mission of building an NHS fit for the future?
I can indeed commit to that. This government sees the embrace of proven technologies and innovation as fundamental to the future survival of the NHS. But I was incredibly happy to see that last autumn the Royal Wolverhampton NHS Trust began enrolling patients in a global first trial of completely personalised cancer vaccines as part of a £1 billion investment negotiated by my department. This shows the way forward, and it shows the way that cooperating between departments is going to deliver for patients and public service users right across the country.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Minister, the early diagnosis saves lives. Randox in my constituency run a number of NHS health checks from the Isle of Wight through to Lanarkshire. Will the Minister encourage the greater use of those checks and also visit Randox with me to see how we can further advance that technology?
I can confirm that by working with the Health Secretary, visiting just quite recently St Tommy's across the road here to see how new technology is being used in diagnostics, it is increasing the number of scans and the quality of the scans to diagnose disease early in order to prevent the disease having the worst outcome. This is being rolled out across the country, and I'm working very, very closely with the Health Secretary to make sure that innovations like this are put to the good use for the country.
Chair of the Select Committee, Chian Warren.
Mr. Speaker, last month's Select Committee brought festive cheer by hearing how British science is advancing the eradication of diseases such as cervical cancer, HIV, AIDS, malaria through innovative and exciting new treatments and diagnostics. But we also heard of the challenges of driving innovation through the NHS. Newcastle's biosciences company AMLO said that adoption is much quicker in the US, and others criticised bureaucratic procurement processes and a culture of inertia. Successive governments have struggled with this challenge. So what specific steps is he taking with the Health Secretary to make sure that British patients benefit from innovation?
Thank you. I'm very grateful for the question, but also to the work that her committee is doing in highlighting this incredibly important challenge that we face as a government and a country. I can say that the Health Secretary for the first time has adopted the role of spreading innovation through the NHS as a personal mission as part of the role of the Secretary of State for the first time. We both co-chair the Office of Life Sciences. Together, our two departments are not just trying to seek to harness the power of technology, but we're also working together under the leadership of the Health Secretary to drive that innovation, because it cannot be locked up in one innovative health trust. It must be put to use right across the NHS for every patient from every part of the United Kingdom.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his answers? What progress has been made on using AI algorithms to analyse medical images such as tumours, fractures or medical conditions? A pithy question, I think, Mr. Speaker.
I'm very grateful for his question, because having visited Huddersfield Hospital myself, one of the first hospitals to fully integrate AI into its radiotherapy work and its scanning work, I can say that having stood there and seen the power for early diagnosis, the ability to detect patterns at an incredibly early stage, I was left with no uncertain doubt that had my mother been scanned at that hospital, she would still be alive today. She was scanned 3 times, that missed the progress of lung cancer in her, and she died several weeks after collapsing, having it not been detected. This is the power of technology. It is a human power, AI, that will transform lives, and we are determined to make sure...
Secretary of State, please, you want me to get to these other questions, I'm sure. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Victoria...
Many of the companies that I've spoken to who are supporting technological innovation in the NHS and beyond talk about their frustrations at the comparative difficulty of getting funding in the UK, and say that the British Business Bank could do much more to de-risk investment and unlock innovation. So what are the government doing to reform funding and provide an oasis in what has become known as the funding valley of death?
Well, firstly, we've done is overall increase to record levels the investment of this government into R&D. You also see the really pioneering work that's going on through Innovate UK, ARIA and the different funding bodies that are available to take different levels of risk when it comes to supporting, creating and upscaling the innovation. The work the Chancellor is doing to reform our pension system in this country is going to unlock capital, because fundamentally we've got to get more capital, domestic capital, into the venture capitalist community so that we can get domestic innovation supported by domestic capital to upscale and solve the challenges that she's talking about.
Thoughts?
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Only this week we announced £289 million contract which will deliver gigabit-capable broadband to 131,000 difficult-to-reach premises across England and Wales. We are determined to make sure in every part of the country, including in his own constituency, that we reach all of these places.
Sir Ashley.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Minister for his answer. In some of villages in my constituency, such as Cannington and Nether Stowey, fewer than 10% of households have access to gigabit broadband, and download speeds are amongst the slowest in the country. So can he advise how his department will ensure that under this new contract, Openreach fulfil their obligations and my constituents get that faster broadband?
Can I first of all commend the honourable member, because this is the 4th time that he's asked a question of me broadly in this territory. In the words of Browning, hark the dominant's persistence till he must be answered to. He's quite right. There are villages in his constituency where there is no proper gigabit-capable internet available. I am determined to make sure that that does happen. I'm very happy to meet with him because I am just, in the words of the musical Oklahoma, a girl who can't say no. I'm very happy to meet with him.
Oh, come on, Rebecca Ball.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has increased investment on R&D to record levels. We have also repaired the public finances, including the black hole left by the previous administration. We have done so by protecting the smallest businesses, by the impact of doubling the employment allowance to 10,500, meaning that 865,000 employers will pay nothing in additional tax.
I thank the Secretary of State for his response. However, universities, which are at the heart of the UK's research ecosystem, face an additional £372 million in annual costs due to the rise in employer national insurance. This threatens their ability to fund cutting-edge research, recruit top talent and support early career researchers. Does the Minister recognise the detrimental impact this will have on research in this country, and will he explore measures to ensure that our global competitiveness in science and innovation is not undermined?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have found ways to get new investment into universities. We are putting in on a solid financial footing, and this is just the start. We always knew we couldn't fix all of the problems we'd inherited from that last administration in 6 months, but we're finding ways to take the great start forward to get new investment into universities, and I can reassure the House the war on universities by that administration has ended.
Shadow Secretary of State Alan Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Companies like ours will be less incentivised to grow. That is the conclusion of Paul Taylor, founder of British tech unicorn Thought Machine, which employs over 500 people. Britain is now missing out on new jobs and investment as a direct result of Labour's national insurance jobs tax. But when the Chancellor started punishing our tech sector, the Secretary of State failed to stand up to her. Why?
We have put the public finances on a solid footing. Our economy is now in a stable way that has not been the case for 14 years. It is also the case that the party opposite wants all of the benefits of the last budget without saying how they will pay for any of it. And until they do, they will not be taken seriously by anyone, including the business that he references.
Alan Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The truth is Labour is failing our tech workers because they don't care about our tech sector. Last September, Paul said he was very keen to list Thought Machine in London instead of New York. And one of his preconditions before listing is being able to grow the business as much as possible. So why did the Secretary of State allow the Chancellor to make growth harder for Britain's tech sector at this budget?
I think the honourable gentleman missed the investment summit that the government held just before Christmas, at which a record £60 billion was invested into this country, 24 billion of which was AI related. That is almost as much directly into AI than was committed in total in that government's previous investment summit in total. This government is unlocking investment. That government in the previous administration wrecked our economy, wrecked our public services, and failed to get faith in our economy so that foreign companies could invest in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just in case the House didn't hear, this government is driving innovation with a record £20.4 billion of R&D investment for 25-26, powering an innovation-led economy across the UK. In Staffordshire, UKRI is backing over £29 million in 70 cutting-edge research and innovation projects. A standout example in innovative UK support for Staffordshire Net Zero Skills for Growth project is equipping the country to seize opportunities in the net zero transition.
Thank you. Towns like those in my constituency are key to the economy but can face unique challenges in accessing innovation opportunities. Please could the Minister tell me how she plans to ensure that towns like Stafford and Eccleshall are able to access new jobs, skills, investments and growth opportunities?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. The Department has a clear vision to ensure that UK remains at the forefront of global innovation, a place where cutting-edge businesses of all sizes can start and grow and local people have high-quality jobs building on local strengths. And I'm delighted to hear about the new multi-million-pound facility at Newcastle and Stafford College's Stafford campus, supported by £15 million of government investment being built in my honourable friend's constituency, which will welcome learners from September. And this facility will help provide the technical skills businesses need, both now and in the future, to support regional and national productivity.
Lewis Atkinson.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. DCIT is leading the charge by establishing the Digital Centre of Government to harness technology and transform our public services. We are committed to improving digital inclusion and accessibility to ensure high-quality online services are available to everyone. And in the coming months, Mr. Speaker, the Department will outline its plans and priorities for Digital Centre and advancing its digital inclusion.
Lewis Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sunderland was recently named the UK's smartest city by The Times, and it was a pleasure to welcome the Secretary of State to visit recently. More than 5,000 homes in our city now have assistive technology installed, supporting the independence of older and disabled people to improve their access to care. Can I ask the Minister how the Government plans to build on the example of Sunderland to improve access to public services across the UK?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his question. The government recognises the potential for digital technology to support people to live independently, and we will set new national standards for care technologies and develop trusted guidance so that people who draw on care, their families and care providers can confidently buy what works and get the safest, most effective tech into their homes or services. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we'll be taking forward a range of initiatives in 25-26, including funding more home adaptations, promoting better use of care technologies.
Forward.
Steps is her department taking for older people who don't feel comfortable about utilising technology to access public services?
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his question. We'd be happy to hear that the public sector body's accessibility regulation requires most public sector organisations to ensure their services are accessible to disabled people and older people by meeting the requirements of the Web Content Accessibility Guidance and by publishing a prescribed format accessibility statement. And the Government Digital Services Accessibility Monitoring Team reviews public sector websites to ensure compliance with the accessibility regulation and support departments to improve their services.
Shadow Minister Dr Ben Spats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome her approach to improve access through technology. However, the majority of concerns I and many colleagues receive are from those who cannot use technology. Rather than improve access, for some, technology can act as a barrier. What is her assessment of the impact of digital exclusion in the UK? And in the strategy that she's announced for digital inclusion, will this include digital exclusion at all levels of government?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, digital inclusion is a priority for this government, and we have set up the Digital Inclusion and Skills Unit to ensure that everyone has the access, skills and support and confidence to participate in modern digital society, whatever their circumstances. Work is ongoing to develop our approach to digital inclusion and coordinate across government departments, and we hope to announce more on this soon. We will be working closely with third sector, the industry, devolved government and local authorities to ensure future interventions are targeted and based on individuals' needs.
Right, we come to topicals. Zoe Franklin.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have seen fear and lies spread about life in Britain. To those who have done little or nothing to combat child sexual abuse are stretching every sinew to jump on that bandwagon. This government is committed to justice for the victims and punishment for the perpetrators of abuse wherever it happens, to whoever who commits it. And on that, I pay tribute to the work the Prime Minister and in particular my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Yardley, did in this regard. The legal codes Ofcom set out last month are the single biggest change to online safety for a generation.
In 2023, the Lords Digital Committee found that 1.7 million households were without internet. With the forthcoming switchover to internet protocol television, would the Minister outline how they're working to ensure that no one is left behind by that switchover?
I'm very grateful for a question. It's incredibly important. Broadcast TV is legally protected until 2034. This government is committed to ensuring audiences can access television in a way that suits them. Too many people are excluded from digital activity through lacking the basic skills. In the not-too-distant future, I'll be launching the Digital Inclusion Plan. I know that she takes cross-party working very seriously. I hope she'll meet with me so I can brief her on that work and involve her ideas as we develop it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer the House to my register of interest. Globally, billions of pounds of investment are flowing into companies creating new technologies to power data centres. Communities across the UK should be sharing this opportunity of well-paid skilled jobs which this investment offers. In Derby, Rolls-Royce are world leaders in the development of small modular reactors. I love Derby. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that they show British innovation at its strongest and would be a dynamic partner for any technology company wishing to invest in the future?
I'm grateful for his question. I do agree, of course, and of course the other side seem to as well. I agree that technological innovation will be the key to move to net zero, and the UK will be at the forefront of that, and SMRs are particularly exciting. I've met with Rolls-Royce. They have a great advocate in the honourable member. I look forward to hearing more from him and seeing how we can support this exciting technology into the future.
Blakeston.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. What steps is the government taking to support pioneering British companies like Cranfield Aerospace Solutions in mid-Bedfordshire in their pursuit of hydrogen-powered flight? And how will the industrial strategy ensure the UK remains a global leader in sustainable aviation technology?
Thank you. He raises a very important point, one that this government is committed to. That's why we increased R&D spending to the highest of any government in this country, and it will have a direct impact on the issues that he raises.
Before we give Prime Minister's questions, I'm delighted to welcome in the gallery the Speaker of the Lok Sabha of India. Right, let us move to questions to the Prime Minister. Neil Coyle.
Number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I wish all members of this House a Happy New Year. Mr. Speaker, our thoughts, of course, are with those affected by the recent flooding. And we thank the responders who are working hard to keep communities safe. Mr. Speaker, this week we published our elective reform plan to rebuild our NHS and end the Tory backlog. We will deliver where the previous government failed, empowering patients, boosting productivity, more care in the community and incentivising reform. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Of course.
On behalf of everyone in Southwark, and I hope the whole House, can I offer the Prime Minister condolences on the loss of his brother over Christmas and wish everyone a Happy New Year. Last July, the public overwhelmingly backed Labour's manifesto commitment to halving violence against women and girls. Can the Prime Minister set out how today's vote on the Children's Wellbeing Bill is a crucial step to delivering that promise, to protecting children, and without the delay of an unnecessary further lengthy inquiry?
Can I thank him for his remarks about my brother and the other colleagues who've sent me remarks. Mr Speaker, he raises a very important issue. Violence against women and girls, abuse, child sexual exploitation are sickening. Many victims have been let down for a very long time by warped ideas about community relations and the protection of institutions. Mr Speaker, he raises the question of inquiries. There have been a number of inquiries, both national and local, including one covering Oldham, and reasonable people can agree or disagree on whether a further inquiry is necessary. This morning I met some of the victims and survivors of this scandal, and they were clear with me that they want action now, not the delay of a further inquiry. The J inquiry, the last national inquiry, was 7 years, which would take us with a further inquiry to 2031. I think action is what's required. But whatever your view, whatever anyone's view on whether a further inquiry is needed, what I find shocking is that anyone in this House would vote down the Children's Wellbeing Bill this afternoon, which is vital protections for the most vulnerable in our society. And I urge the Leader of the Opposition to withdraw her wrecking amendment.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr Speaker, the whole House has heard that the Prime Minister lost his brother during the Christmas period. So can I offer him, on behalf of my party, our sincerest condolences. The new year has started with a focus on the decades-long rape gang scandal. Across the country, thousands of girls were tortured and sexually abused at the hands of men who treated them as things to be used and disposed of, destroying many lives forever. The Prime Minister has mentioned previous inquiries. He is right. There has been an inquiry into child sexual abuse, but it wasn't about the rape gang scandal. In its 468 pages, it mentioned Rotherham just once. Is the Prime Minister confident that we know the full extent of rape gang activity?
Prime Minister.
Can I first thank her for her condolences, and can I thank her for reaching out over the Christmas period when I lost my brother? I really did appreciate that, and I appreciate it today. Mr Speaker, on the question of a further inquiry, there have been a number of inquiries, some of them localised, including the Mayor of Manchester's inquiry recently, and of course a national inquiry Professor Jay carried out, took 7 years, had 20 recommendations, none of which actually were implemented by the party opposite when they were in government. Now, this is a really serious issue. We must focus, obviously, on the victims and survivors. There's no fixed view on the victims and survivors about a further national inquiry. There are mixed views. But there is a view, and I share this view, that what is needed now is action on what we already know. We already know, myself from personal knowledge when I was Chief Prosecutor, that warped ideas, myths and stereotypes about victims were at the heart of this. We've known that for a decade. The Jay report called for mandatory reporting. I called for it 11 years ago. What we need now is action. What can't be tolerated is the idea that this afternoon members opposite will vote down a bill which protects children, include Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, let me just. One of the provisions in the bill is to protect children vulnerable today who are out of school to prevent abusers ever taking those children out of school. I implore members opposite to defy the misleading leadership of the Leader of the Opposition and vote for a really important bill.
Mr. Speaker, I'm shocked that the Prime Minister would say that actions were not taken. He knows full well that we accepted 18. He knows full well that we accepted 18 of the 20 recommendations in the J inquiry and went further, launching a gangs task force that found 550 more perpetrators. That shows that there is still work to be done. In Rotherham alone, there have been over 1,400 victims. Across Oldham, Bradford, Bristol, Rochdale, and dozens more towns, there have been thousands more victims. But no one has joined the dots. No one has the total picture. And it is almost certainly still going on. One victim from Telford, and I know he says that victims have different views. We have different views across this House. But one victim from Telford says she wants a national inquiry because it will hold people accountable in a way that previous inquiries have not. It is very possible to have actions, take on more, and still have a national inquiry. So why won't he listen to victims and launch a national inquiry which would have the power to summon witnesses and make them give evidence under oath?
Mr. Speaker, she says they accepted the recommendations. They didn't act on them. Exactly. One of the central recommendations was mandatory reporting, and it still hasn't been enacted. I called for this 11 years ago. They've been tweeting and talking. We've been acting. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has been an MP, I think, for 8 years. Her party have been in government for 7.5 of those 8 years. She was the Children's Minister. She was the Women's and Equalities Minister. I can't recall her once raising this issue in the House, once calling for a national inquiry. It's only in recent days she's jumped on the bandwagon. Now, Mr. Speaker, in fairness, if I'm wrong about that, and she has raised it, then I invite her to say that now, and I will happily withdraw the remark that she hasn't raised it in this House in the 8 years that she's been here until today.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is being very specific because I have raised this issue. I've raised it in speeches. I've raised it publicly. He knows that as a minister, I would not have been speaking on this specific issue. I was not a Home Office minister. But Mr. Speaker, I will remind him about other victims who came to me who I did help. The victims of the Tavistock scandal who came to me as a minister. I didn't send them away like his safeguarding minister. I made sure, as his Labour Party were calling me transphobic, that we launched the CAS review, which even his health secretary has accepted. So we do right by victims, Mr. Speaker. The reason why a national inquiry is important is because this issue is systemic. It has been involving local and national officials, the police, prosecutors and politicians. He talks about some of the local inquiries, but these interlinked issues cannot be covered by local inquiries alone. In fact, the leaders of the Manchester inquiry resigned because they couldn't get evidence, they couldn't summon witnesses, and not a single person in a position of authority has been held to account. The Prime Minister called for 9 inquiries in the last Parliament. Does he not see that by resisting this one, people will start to worry about a cover-up?
Mr. Speaker, this is an important issue, and we have to focus on the victims and survivors, and it isn't helpful. This sort of lies and misinformation and slinging of mud doesn't help them one bit. Mr. Speaker, she raised a question of a victim with me, and quite right to, and I accept that victims and survivors are in different places on this. Those that I've spoken to are worried about the delay of a further inquiry. The last inquiry took 7 years. That would take us to 2031. Now, these inquiries, amongst the issues that's been raised with me, and if she's been speaking to victims, they'll have raised this with her, is that it's very hard for victims and survivors to come forward to explain what's happened to them. They do not want to be rushed through this process, which is why the last one took 7 years. It's not sensible to suggest that this can be done in a hurry on the cheap and comprehensively. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, that would take us to, let's say, 2030, 2031. The victims that I've spoken to want action today. I agree with them on that. But what I don't understand, I genuinely don't understand, is why anybody today would vote against the Children Wellbeing Bill, which will protect children who are vulnerable today. It will kill the bill. It will stop those provisions for children exposed at risk today. I implore them, vote for the bill. Don't wreck this in this misguided way.
Mr. Speaker, it is very possible to have shorter inquiries, especially if they are covering areas that have not been looked at yet. We don't need to repeat the work that has already been done. Let's look at new areas. Former Labour MP Anne Pryor said that there were councillors and MPs all over the country who knew what was going on but were terrified of being labelled racist. A national inquiry would ask if there was a racial or cultural motivation to some of these crimes where white girls were seen, as Jack Straw said, as easy meat. The member for Rotherham was sacked from Labour's front bench for speaking out about rape gangs. Does the Prime Minister now recognise that sacking people for telling the truth creates a chilling effect that means victims aren't listened to?
Well, I'm very happy to call out anybody who hasn't acted properly in these cases. I've done it many, many times before, and it doesn't matter to me which political party they're in. I'll call them out and I will condemn them. Mr. Speaker, when I was Chief Prosecutor, I took measures to confront this head-on. The first of the mass prosecutions for an Asian gang was in Rochdale. My team came to see me. It put a number of Asian men in the dock. They wanted the green light for the first of these cases to take place. I gave that green light, but on one condition, because it came to my attention that one of the men that was going into the dock had previously been arrested but not charged. And I said, you can bring the first of these mass prosecutions, but only if you look back at the file where we weren't charged and tell me what went wrong with a report so that I can start to put it right. And that's what started the reforms I brought about. So that's the approach I took in practice, whilst others were tweeting and talking. It's the approach I would take now in any case where there's wrongdoing here. But what we've got to do now, Professor Jay has said this, we have had a number of strong findings. There are 20 on the table from Professor Jay. We've got to get on with action. Don't block it this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, we need to focus on what this is really about. This is not about the Prime Minister's work in the CPS. And I would say very respectfully to the Prime Minister, it's not about you, it is about the victims. Be a leader, not a lawyer. We know that people were scared to tell the truth because they thought they would be called racist. If we want to stop this from ever happening again, we cannot be afraid. The Labour Party has adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia. That same APPG report said talking about sex groomers was an example of Islamophobia. This is exactly why people are scared to tell the truth. And the lack of clarity means that innocent British Muslims are smeared by association. That is not fair, and only a national inquiry can solve this. So will the Prime Minister look again at the Labour Party's adoption of the definition of Islamophobia, its chilling effect, and rule out introducing it in government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will call out any aspect that has prevented anybody coming forward or any case going forward when it comes to violence against women and girls, child abuse or child sexual exploitation, as I have been doing now for the best part of 15 years. But, yes, some people will say there should be a further inquiry. But that does, I accept that, but that means all the victims and survivors who are going to give evidence need to be in a position to do so. Not all of them are. I've been speaking to them. There are some that do think they are. It will take time. All of the institutions will have to give evidence. That will take time. This will delay things till 2031 also. But Mr. Speaker, we already know what the major flaws are. And my argument is we should get on with that action. And that's why we're bringing forward the bill this afternoon.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has effectively told us that he's not able to do two things at the same time. This issue of a delay is a weak excuse, and I would say to him that by refusing this inquiry, he is enabling those people who wish to smear all British Muslims based on the actions of a small minority. He is talking about distraction tactics. Let us have the truth. The Prime Minister cannot tell the House the full scale of the scandal. He doesn't want questions asked of Labour politicians who may be complicit. He won't listen to the victims. He won't listen to the victims who are calling for a national inquiry. He is making this all about a bill this afternoon. Later today, he will tell Labour MPs, including in Telford, Rochdale, Bristol, Derby, Aylesbury, Oldham, Bradford, Peterborough, Coventry, Middlesbrough, Newcastle, Ramsgate, to tell all of these people to vote against a national inquiry into the gangs which have systematically gang-raped children in their constituencies. This is one of the worst scandals in British history, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry? This is a very, very important issue that does matter to the country. It matters to all our constituents. I want to make sure they can hear what's being said by the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the worst scandals in recent British history. But how are they going to explain to their constituents that obeying his whip is more important than doing the right thing?
She's right to say it's one of the worst scandals. It's terrible. That's why I acted on it. If her recently acquired view that it's a scandal, having spent a lot of time on social media over Christmas, not once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations. They want a national inquiry. We had a national inquiry, the J inquiry, the J report. 20 recommendations, not a single one implemented. Not a single one implemented. And she said you can do two things at once. You can't kill the bill this afternoon, wreck that bill, and protect children. There was Mr. Speaker, there was a dreadful case of Sarah Sharif that everybody will remember. This was the girl taken out of school and abused by an abuser. The bill this afternoon fixes that gap. And I know, I'm looking across, I know there are honourable members on the benches opposite who know very well that what's in this bill is necessary, that it's the right thing to do, and that would want to vote for this bill. I urge them to think twice about following this short-sighted, misguided, bandwagon-jumping approach of the non-leadership of the Leader of the Opposition. I urge them to.
Speaker, my constituent, Anne-Marie, and countless other armed forces families across Aldershot and Farnborough are living in shabby military accommodation that simply isn't good enough after 14 years of Conservative neglect. So can I welcome the Ministry of Defence plan to buy back thousands of homes in my constituency? And will the Prime Minister set out how sorting out this bad deal left behind by a past Tory government will make life better for Anne-Marie and others like her living in the home of the British Army?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for her question? And we all owe extraordinary debt of thanks to those who serve. Mr. Speaker, by reacquiring over 36,000 service family homes, including 1,700 in my honourable friend's constituency, we can rapidly transform substandard accommodation. The deal that we've done also saves the taxpayer around £230 million per year in rent, and of course it follows the largest pay rise for the armed forces in over 20 years. There is of course still work to do, but this is a major step forward.
We now come to the Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Happy New Year to you. And can I join others by offering my personal condolences to the Prime Minister on the loss of his brother? And can I take this opportunity to express my sadness at the passing of a much-loved member of the Liberal Democrat family, Baroness Jenny Randerson. Mr. Speaker, fixing the care crisis is urgent. for the millions of people, elderly and disabled, who are not getting the care they need, for the millions of family carers who are making huge sacrifices to fill the gap, for the NHS, where over 12,000 people are stuck in hospital beds because they can't get out of hospitals, the care is not there for them. The Prime Minister is right to say we need a cross-party approach today, but as Sir Andrew Dillot has said today, that needn't take 3 years. So will the Prime Minister please speed up this work so 2025 is the year we finally rise to the challenge of fixing care?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for raising this important issue and thank him for his condolences. Yes, it is right we need to get this right. I'm on a cross-party consensus on this and invite him to work with us on this, as I know he will. But it is important, and he's right to say we need some action now as well. And that is why it's important I point out the immediate action that we've taken, the £3.7 billion of additional funding in the budget for social care, another £86 million to allow 7,800 more disabled and elderly people to live more independent lives, and of course the increased carers allowance. And the way in which we've set this up is in stages so that we can act and improve as we go along, but making sure that we've got consensus for the bigger changes that may be proposed in the review. And I do invite him and members across the House to work with us on this so that we can get this right and make sure that what we put in place endures beyond just a few years. Thank you.
Fred David.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid if the government doesn't bring in these long-term social care reforms this year, their NHS reforms, this Parliament will fail. So I hope he will revisit the timetable. But moving on, Mr. Speaker, while the honourable member for Clacton may miss out on his big allowance from Elon Musk, the spectre of the richest man in the world trying to buy a British political party should give us all pause for thought. And after years of the Conservatives taking millions of pounds of Russian money, will the Prime Minister now work with us to bring in long overdue reforms of party funding so that power in this country lies with the voters and not wealthy overseas oligarchs?
I think we all had a smile on Sunday when the honourable member said how cool it was to have the support of Musk, only for Musk to say he should be removed. Just a few hours later, that's the rough and tough of politics. And of course, we're looking at the question of funding more generally.
Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the efforts this Labour government has made to reset our relationship with the European Union and to seek to remove unnecessary trade barriers. The trading links between the UK and mainland Europe are of particular importance to my constituency of Ashford. So would the Prime Minister support my efforts and those of other Kent colleagues to restore international train service to Ashford International Station that will help economic growth in my constituency, Kent and wider South East?
Prime Minister.
Right. Thank my honourable friend for raising this question. Businesses in his constituents have been badly let down by the deal of the last government, and we, of course, are resetting and strengthening that relationship on the economy, on energy, on security to deliver the growth that we need. I know this is an issue of considerable frustration to his constituents. The decision in question, Mr. Speaker, is ultimately for Eurostar, but we are keen to see international services reinstated to Ashford as soon as possible, and I would be happy for the Rail Minister to update him on the latest discussions.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, can I begin by doing something unusual, which is to commend the Prime Minister on his earlier answers to the Leader of the Opposition and, of course, to pass on my party's condolences to him for the loss of his brother. Outside of this place, temperatures continue to plummet, energy bills continue to rise, and the winter fuel allowance has been unacceptably taken away from so many vulnerable pensioners. Now, the Prime Minister intimated prior to Christmas that he had no regrets about any of the decisions that he has taken in office. Does he understand that the public do?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for his condolences. We took some tough decisions. They led to a budget which delivered the largest settlement since devolution began to Scotland. If he thinks we should now reverse that, then he should say so. What it's done is it's given the money, so now the SNP have the money, they have the power, and no more excuses for the non-delivery that we see in Scotland. If he wants me to reverse that, he should say so.
Sam Rushworth.
Mr. Speaker. Feeling safe in your own community is among the most basic of human needs, but after 14 years of Tory cuts to Durham's frontline police and breaking the criminal justice system, too many of my constituents are victims of violence, theft and antisocial behaviour, and these crimes too often go unpunished. Now, I know the Prime Minister's had a lifelong commitment to protecting victims, so what assurances can the Prime Minister give my constituents that our new government will be tough on crime and on the causes of crime?
Mr. Speaker, he's right to raise this important issue, and I have to say, when he said there were cuts to polices and somebody said boring, I think that somebody opposite just did boring. That tells you everything you need to know about the last 14 years. He's right. We need to crack down on those committing vile acts in our communities. And that's why our plan for change puts 13,000 extra police and PCSO officers into neighbourhood policing, 3.5% real terms increase, and of course tough new respect orders. Where they lost control, we'll take back control and deliver safe and secure communities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Dipak first opened the doors to his pharmacy in 1991, and he's been serving the Chelmsford community ever since, greeting many of his patients by name. But Dipak's business is struggling. His NHS contract no longer covers the cost of the drugs he has to dispense. For example, he's sometimes been forced to pay over 100 times more for a particular mental health drug than his contract provides. Dipak is dipping into his life savings to keep his pharmacy afloat, and I'm sure that many other pharmacists across the country are doing the same. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that no pharmacist should be forced to use their own money to keep their pharmacy viable?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for raising this really important and challenging case? Community pharmacists like Dipak play a vital role in our health service. And as she knows, the Department of Health and Social Care sets drug tariff prices and regularly assesses what pharmacies are reimbursed to ensure overall they're paid fairly. If she would prepare to share the details further with me, I will look and have a review by the team of the particular case that she's raised with me. Thank you.
Mark Seward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, I was honoured to accept an invitation from the European Jewish Association to go to Krakow and discuss the role of Holocaust education in tackling the rising tide of anti-Semitism across Europe. We also visited Auschwitz and Auschwitz-Birkenau, where we laid wreaths and paid tributes to the many victims of the Holocaust. Given that this month marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of those evil places, will the Prime Minister set out what this government is doing on Holocaust education to ensure that never again means never again?
Well, I thank him for raising this. Anti-Semitism is completely abhorrent and has no place whatsoever in our society. Mr. Speaker, I recently met with Jewish community leaders in Downing Street to discuss what further we can do to combat anti-Semitism, and that includes allocating £54 million for the Community Security Trust to continue their vital work, committing to building a new Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre, and providing at least £2.2 million to continue the funding lessons from Auschwitz. And I look forward to working with others on those important proposals.
Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses like Hicks in Harpenden, charities like the Hospice of St Francis in Berkhamsted, health and social care providers like the Elms Medical Practice in Harpenden, a GP, are amongst those up and down this country who are warning the government about the negative impact of the proposed changes to national insurance contributions. When will the Prime Minister heed those warnings and, at the very least, look at exemptions for health and social care providers like they have for the NHS?
Prime Minister.
Thank you for raising this. Look, we had to deliver a budget to wipe the slate clean and to deliver the stable basis for our economy and at the same time repair our public services. That's why we invested £25.6 billion over 2 years in the NHS, including additional funding for GPs and for hospices. And we are taking measures to ensure that funding is there to support our vital services.
Then
Mr Speaker, every week I visit constituents in my Hackney South and Shoreditch constituency living in the most appalling, overcrowded social housing, some with triple bunk beds in the bedroom and the parents on a sofa bed in the living room. The nearest available property to buy would be £500,000, and it's out of the reach for these hard-working families. I really welcome our government's commitment to 1.5 million new homes. Will the Prime Minister agree that we need clear targets for the number of social housing units so that families in Hackney can live in dignity?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to her for raising this, and she describes an appalling situation when it comes to housing, and one will be familiar to a number of MPs on both sides of the House. And that's why we will deliver the 1.5 million homes that we desperately need across the country. She's right, and the budget announced 500 million into the Affordable Homes programme, which is hugely important, 100 million of that going to the Greater London Authority. And we will also, Mr Speaker, reform the right to buy to deliver a fairer, better value, a more sustainable scheme where long-standing tenants can buy their own home.
Andrew George.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In Cornwall, in the last 10 years, over £500 million has been handed to holiday homeowners through various tax loopholes, etc., whilst local families are being evicted from their homes to make way for yet more holiday homes as the housing crisis deepens and worsens. The 6 MPs in Cornwall are determined to reverse this situation and to address these issues before the end of this Parliament. Will the Prime Minister agree to meet us so we get the full backing of government and deliver first rather than second homes for the good of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly?
Prime Minister.
I thank you for raising this. We are committed to building those 1.5 million homes, and that includes 4,500 new homes every year in Cornwall. But I do recognise the point he makes, which is that excessive concentrations of short-term lets and second homes in places like Cornwall can impact the availability and affordability of homes. That's why we'll enable councils to charge a premium on the council tax bills of second homes, abolish the furnished homes let regime and introduce a registration scheme for short-term lets. But I am happy to make sure that he and his Cornish colleagues do get the meeting they want with the Housing Minister to discuss that further.
Joyce Benton-Glenn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This government is committed to using the criminal justice system to tackle violence against women and girls. But when an abuser can use a child custody battle to continue their abuse, as happened in the case of one of my constituents, it's clear that we need to raise the issue in the civil courts too. Will the Prime Minister please look at ending the absurd assumption that a domestic abuser's involvement in a child's life is advantageous to their welfare?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's right, Mr Speaker. Family courts must never be a tool that domestic abusers can use to continue their appalling abuse, and that's why we're expanding the number of new Pathfinder courts to provide dedicated support to survivors and protect the welfare of children. We are reviewing the presumption of parental involvement, and we'll set out our position in due course. And I'll make sure that he meets the relevant minister to discuss this further.
Christine Jolly.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I associate myself with the remarks of the Liberal Democrat leader and others today. Happy New Year to everyone, but 2025 is already proving a challenge for many of my constituents. Pensioners, families, small businesses, the hospitality industry, GPs, social care, as others have said. They know that the SNP has failed to deliver for Scotland. They hear when the Prime Minister says that the Conservatives left the economy in a mess, and they know that governments make difficult decisions. But what they are asking me is, when is this government going to do something positive for them to overcome the negative impacts they're facing from the budget?
Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Can I just address something I should have addressed to our leader, which is to express our condolences about Jenny Randerson. I apologise, I overlooked that earlier on. She raises the point about the failure of the SNP and the legacy of the Tories, and I'm proud that this Labour government delivered the largest budget settlement for Scotland since devolution, and that means, Mr Speaker, in answer to a question, 100,000 workers in Scotland benefit from the increases from the national minimum and living wage each year. An estimated 3.2 million people in Scotland will benefit from the extension of the 5p cut in fuel duty. And it comes, of course, on top of the 125 million set up Great British Energy in Aberdeen. And it reinforces the point. They've got the powers, but a terrible record. They left a terrible legacy. We're getting on for delivering for Scotland.
Josh Newbley.
Last year, this Labour government delivered justice for members of the Mine Workers Pension Scheme.
Yeah.
45,000 members of the similar British Coal Staff Superannuation Scheme are keen to see their £2.3 billion investment reserve returned to them, which could boost coalfield communities like mine and Cannock Chase. Will the Prime Minister meet with retired miners, trustees and coalfield MPs to discuss what could be done for BCSS members up and down the country?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Right, thank you for raising this issue. I was pleased, Mr Speaker, that the first increased payments to Mine Workers Scheme members were made at the end of November. I do understand the strong feeling on the British Coal Staff Superannuation Scheme, which is why the Minister for Industry met the trustees last year, and we will be working with the coal staff trustees to consider their proposals once the new Mine Workers Pension Scheme arrangements have been agreed.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, first of all, we had a Chancellor who embellished her CV, then we had a Transport Secretary with a fraud conviction, and now we've got an anti-corruption minister who is being investigated for corruption. Now, I know the Prime Minister likes living in free accommodation, but does he really think it's appropriate that his minister is being given free housing by the political allies of some very dubious foreign regimes?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the City Minister has acted appropriately by referring herself to the independent adviser. We brought in our new ministerial code to allow ministers to ask to establish the facts, and I'm not going to give a running commentary on that important exercise.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
The last couple of days, I wrote to the England and Wales Cricket Board regarding the upcoming game in the Championship Trophy against Afghanistan on the 26th of February. I have met with the ECB and we are calling for the game to be boycotted. I thank everybody for the support that I've had across this House and also at the other place. I also would like to thank very much the Prime Minister for his intervention with the with the International Cricket Council yesterday. But would he please agree to meet and talk to his counterparts in South Africa and Australia that they boycott the games as well?
Mr Speaker, there's been an appalling erosion of the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, and we all should condemn that suppression of freedoms in the strongest terms, and that's why we provided additional aid, at least 50% of which we're going to women and girls. DCMS are in touch with the international counterparts on this issue. I welcome the England and Wales Cricket Board making strong representations to the International Cricket Council on Afghanistan's women's cricket team.
Final question to Roger Gale.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, setting aside the matter of grooming gangs, the opposition amendment on the order paper today sets out very clearly why the bill that we shall be debating is so very deeply flawed. And if it is to become an act of Parliament, it will have to be completely rewritten in committee. But, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister from that dispatch box has made much of his service as the public prosecutor. So could he tell the House in that capacity why during his time he declined to instigate a prosecution for rape and sexual abuse against Mohammed Fayed?
Prime Minister.
That case never crossed my desk.
Right. That completes Prime Minister's question. Point of order, Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, during an answer about police numbers, the Prime Minister said that someone on this side of the House shouted boring. Can I correct the record following a request from Hansard that I actually said bingo because of repetitive and overused cliches that the Prime Minister was using during PMQs?
Well, I would say you've corrected the record. The thing is, I wouldn't have owned up in the way you did, but there we are. Let us move on. Right, let us come to the 10-minute rule bill. Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to prohibit quantitative easing, to prohibit the government from indemnifying any losses that may result from quantitative easing, and for connected purposes. The purpose of this draft legislation is to ensure that the state is as economically accountable to the people as the people are to the state. To do this means terminating the state's ability to debase the value of money through practices such as quantitative easing, which are not an option for the individual. Clipping, sweating, plugging and cutting are forms of coin debasement either by government or by individuals. The most famous modern UK example was the Great Debasement between 1544 and 1551, when Henry VIII reduced the gold and silver content of coinage by use of base metals such as copper in order to fund his bacchanalian overspending and wars with France. It has been a common feature of government behaviour over the 5,000 years of trading history of gold and continues today in the form of quantitative easing. With no gold standard to constrain unproductive investment and direct capital to sound and profitable investment ventures, policymakers have today become obsessed with short-term stimuli centred on the performance of stock and bond markets. Central banks have become uncontrolled, unconstrained and reckless in their pursuit of delivering non-stop, unsustainable global growth driven by credit. QE is what third world dictators used to indulge in shortly before their currencies descended into chaos, but has now become a mainstream tool to avoid the Darwinian reality of capitalism. History is littered with examples of governments, dictators and kings abusing their hard-working citizens. The Roman coinage in their ascendant years was bolder, larger and widely accepted, but reduced in size, weight and content as her empire waned. John Law's Mississippi scheme in France in 1716 to 1720, when he and the Duke of Orleans, who was regent for Louis XV, presided over an establishment-backed scheme on the premise that paper money was preferable to gold or a metal-backed currency, and shares were a superior form of money as they paid dividends. It was, in essence, the first national central bank. It ended in chaotic collapse and badly damaged France and her economy. National debt was supported by printed money in the same way as today through QE via central banks globally. I fear the ending will be the same in due course. In Weimar Germany after the First World War, the Reichsbank had become accustomed to printing money to fund the wartime economy, increasing marks in circulation from 2 billion to 45 billion between 1914 and 1919. State debt rose 30 times, from 5 billion marks to 153 billion marks. This continued with the value of the mark going into freefall in early 1923 and the issuance of notes of up to 100 trillion marks before cents returned. It was a time of moral decline, short-termism, prostitution, benefiting the opportunists, not the long-term wealth creators. With currency devaluation came a decline in all that had previously been cherished, including loyalty and faith, morals, innocence and honour. Over recent times, capitalism in the UK and globally has been undermined as states have grown in size and central banks have distorted logic. Systemic risk management in the 70s via the clearing banks was gradually replaced by more overt interventions in 1987 by Alan Greenspan and again in 1997 when long-term capital management, an offshore company, was bailed out by the US government. 2008 was a watershed moment when Gordon Brown bailed out financial institutions with an estimated cost to taxpayers of £137 billion. This was followed by quantitative easing between March 2009 and August 2016. This was dwarfed by the actions of Hank Paulson and Ben Bernanke in the US in 2008, when they used $700 billion of intervention to prop up the financial system generally, and AIG in particular. During the COVID crisis of 2020 and 21, when many bad decisions were taken by an already bloated state, between £310 billion and £410 billion, equivalent to between £4,600 and £6,100 per person in the UK, was spent in a number of questionable centrally planned interventions. In rather the same way as early Weimar Germany, Britain finds itself heavily indebted and continuing to run multiple deficits, making matters progressively worse. Our moral decline is clearly evident as true capitalism has been undermined by regular intervention, increasing state regulation, and the growing bloated and inefficient state. It is interesting that Weimar Germany's revival started with the dismissal of many civil servants, and social welfare spending was massively cut. The French government's recent funding crisis makes it look even more like a national Ponzi scheme than in the UK. Both wings of French politics refused to sanction debt reduction, despite the budget deficit being expected to rise to over 113% of GDP by this year. Market concerns are pushing the euro lower and France's borrowing costs higher, with bond yields briefly surpassing Spain's for the first time since 2008. Javier Milei, Argentina's president since 2023, has brought significant economic reforms with his radical libertarian agenda, earning both praise and criticism. Milei's focus has been on cutting public sector spending, reducing inflation and implementing drastic fiscal adjustments, which have led to improvement in Argentina's economy. Inflation has fallen from nearly 300% to around 119%. Public sector jobs have been reduced by 35,000, and the country has achieved a primary surplus. Argentina's economy has also exited recession with a growth rate of 3.9%, and borrowing costs have dropped, signalling reduced debt default risks. Elon Musk has been appointed to lead Donald Trump's new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which he will co-run with Trump ally and entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy. Musk said the department's creation would address government waste and inefficiency. Trump described DOGE as a transformative initiative, likening it to the Manhattan Project, aimed at slashing bureaucracy, cutting regulations and restructuring federal agencies. Money is the foundation of all human exchange of enterprise and replaced barter in the earliest communities. It allows for the transfer of skills through a transferable medium such as a coin, a note, or indeed a transfer. By a continuous process of inflation, however perpetrated, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. In doing so, the size of the state inevitably grows and becomes a self-serving, greedy master of the people they should be serving. Common sense, logic, and human relationships among working people are inevitably undermined, and there is a general moral decline in society. Taxes should be transparent, justifiable, and simple. The cost of government should be covered by taxes alone, which limits the growth of excessive statism. Gold has historically been the standard store of value and protection against currency debasement for over 5,000 years. It's interesting that profligate governments always denigrate gold holding, and holding it is often banned by governments in crisis who have deceived their electorate. The words of President Woodrow Wilson after he signed the Federal Reserve Act should serve as a warning to all of us. I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free option, no longer a government by conviction and a vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. Friedrich von Hayek, an eminent Austrian school economist, said, "I do not think it's an exaggeration to say that history is largely a history of inflation. Usually inflation's engineered by governments for the gain of governments. Given the historical track record of states abusing their citizens by various forms of currency debasement, including QE, the default position should be to make it illegal unless this democratically elected House has an informed vote supporting debasement. This bill seeks to achieve this position, and I commend it to the House."
That the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. One of us has got to sit down, Rupert. I've got to do my bit. You're coming back on in a minute, don't we? So, who will prepare to bring in the bill?
Mr. Speaker, Richard Tice, Jim Allister, myself and others.
You've got to name them. You can't not name them.
It's McMurdoch.
And me.
And a one, right, OK.
Say Ed David. Put Ed David down. Put Rachel. Rachel from the Council.
Maybe Rachel Reeves, I don't know.
Can you just read now the names for clarity so that Hansard's got it?
Tice, Jim Allister, James McMurdoch, Lee Anderson, and myself.
All right. It's a shambles. Absolute shambles. Rupert Lowe.
Future leader.
Quantitative easing prohibition bill.
Second reading, what then?
24th of January, Speaker.
The 24th of January. Right, the clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, second reading. Now.
Right. The reasoned amendment in the name of the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, has been selected. The Minister will now move the second reading. Secretary of State Bridget Phillipson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the bill now be read a second time. Mr. Speaker, in the week in which we return to this House and our children return to school, I am proud to be the Secretary of State for Education in a truly child-centred government. The actions I take, the decisions I make, they are always in pursuit of what is best for the children of this country. And that starts, Madam Deputy Speaker, with keeping them safe. And after little more than 6 months in power, we are delivering the change that is many years overdue. No more lessons learned, no more paper pushing, no more foot dragging. It is time for government to act. And this government will act with the urgency our children deserve and our country demands. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill puts forward bold new measures to keep children safe. A new legal obligation for safeguarding partners to work hand in hand with education, because it's often teachers who first see the signs of abuse and neglect. A new duty to establish multi-agency child protection teams, because keeping children safe is everyone's business. A new power to put in place a unique identifier for children, sharing information so that no child falls through the cracks. A new compulsory children not in school register in every area of England, because if children aren't in school, we need to know where they are. A new requirement for local authority consent for parents to home educate their children if they are on a child protection plan or subject to child protection inquiries. I respect the rights of parents to make choices about their child's education, But children's safety must always come first. And under this government, their safety will always come first. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, let's be crystal clear. A vote against this bill today is a vote against the safety of our children, a vote against their childhoods and against their futures. Today, Conservative MPs have a choice. They can choose to back measures to protect children, or they can choose to chase headlines. They can choose to transform the lives of the most vulnerable young people in this country, or they can choose to sacrifice their safety for political gain. They can choose